we thought it was important that this request go through the tab for discussion before going through the standard committee process. So that's all I'm going to say about that for now, and then we'll get into that later in the agenda. And that completes the chair's report. Is Mike Barnes here? I don't recall if Mike was here, or somebody from MnDOT.
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Member Barnes, do you have any updates for us from the MnDOT perspective?
Sure, I got just a couple items here.
Good, thank you.
First, we have the freight program solicitation that's open. The applications are due by September 28th. There's actually a webinar tomorrow from 3 to 4 o'clock, and we sent some info to Elaine, and she'll send that out to the group. So for those that are interested in finding out some more, they can do the webinar, and if there's some questions and more details from that, they can get it from there. Or there's also the web link where there's more information. So I just wanted to let folks know about that. And then I think I think you want to know a little more about the Trunk Highway 5 or the airport project. And right now we're moving into where we're doing the stage 3 kind of impact for the detour side of it now. So this is the final switching. I know the actual project's been going along well, again, because of the traffic being lower in the summer. It's moving along. The final one now is the eastbound 5 is open between 494 and St. Paul. So if you're going to the airport, you can now go that direction. The westbound is closed coming from St. Paul. When you get to the 62, then you got to go around westbound and come around kind of the counterclockwise. And so those that are leaving the airport now will use eastbound 5 and then go either 62 or other route. So we're again moving along, and we're kind of in the final stage of the detour. So that's all I had, Mr. Chair, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Member Barnes. Any questions for Mike Barnes? All right, good. MPCA, you can see in your agenda, we touched base with them. We being Elaine and I touched base with them, and they didn't have anything to report out, and we're unable to attend today. I was thinking we'd get an update on the system they're putting in place for electric vehicles around the state, but they said they weren't ready to report anything on that. So we'll move on to the MAC, and we've got Carl Crimmins with us today, which is good. And if you were on early, you heard Carl say that there's a little bit more activity at the airport. I think Delta is running one of the safest airline operations in the world at this point in time, but let's hear more from Carl about his observations on what's happening at the airport. Carl?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just some numbers for everybody. The year-to-date passenger levels are down 55%, but that includes the months of January, February, and March. For the month of June, domestic travel is down 85%. International travel is down 99%. And operations for June, domestic operations or flights are down 69%. But the positive thing on this is that because the terminal's empty, we're getting a lot of work done. There's new escalators that are being installed. There's new roof canopies have been installed on arrival level to prevent weather from affecting the people being dropped off. A lot of the terrazzo work down in the baggage level has been completed. We have new baggage carousels that are being opened up and being used now. And the inbound roadway work is ongoing. And the only thing I can commit amount concessions at the airport, 61% of food and beverage concessions are closed, and 25 are open reduced hours, 5 are open full hours in the whole Terminal 1. And news and retail, 53% of those are done. None of them are working full hours. So the terminal's a little low. And if you want real ID, they're opening a kiosk. It's scheduled to open at the airport. It was open earlier and it closed because of the pandemic. But now the state of Minnesota says they're going to open the Real ID kiosk at the Terminal 1 September 1st. So you have to have a badge or a boarding pass, and you can call and make an appointment, and you can do your Real ID application at that kiosk. I'm trying to do that myself. I tried to get Real ID at my local place in Anoka, and I had to wait till September, October. And so now I'm going to South St. Paul, and I can get in early September to get a Real ID. So even though you want an ID, you got to wait a long time. If you call, you got to make an appointment, and you're really put off a month or 2 months. So I sort of moved on. Okay, but that's what I have for the airport.
Questions for Mr. Cummins? Airport related? Member Cummins, on the foreign travel being down 99%, my understanding is that all of those, or to the extent somebody is traveling internationally, you can't fly direct internationally out of Minneapolis, St. Paul anymore. You have to go over to Detroit or New York or some other, Atlanta maybe. What's the status there?
Yeah, with Delta, most of their destinations are closed now, are down until the spring of 2021. Like KLM and Amsterdam and South Korea and Tokyo, they've closed international flights because of the travel ban. But if you're considered essential, then you can get a flight. But where you're going to go, like you say, where you're going to go depends on how you're going to get there. You have to determine what your final destination is, and then someone will help you route you through there. There's not very many direct flights from MSP.
All right, interesting. Any other questions from cab members for Member Crimmins? How does this affect your budget, all of this inactivity?
We just had a meeting yesterday, or Monday, and we've been downgraded. Fitch, S&P has downgraded us from AA minus to A plus, 1 point, one level down. But right now we're doing okay. We haven't touched reserves, and the staff there is working on the budget issues. We've given a lot of rent waivers to concessionaires and people, and we're working with the airlines to try to lower costs. But as of right now, we're doing okay. But if this naturally, the longer this drags out, we did get some CARES Act money, $125 million. And so we're using part of that to keep our debt service up so we don't have to go into negative debt service. But again, it's just touch and go right now. But we are seeing a steady incline. I didn't mention parking. In the beginning of April, we were down to 1,000 cars a day in the parking ramps. Last week, we were up to 4,500 cars. So travel is picking up. It's just not gangbusters, but there are more people traveling than ever before April. So it's slowly improving. The flights are slowly improving also.
Right, good, thank you. Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Carl, for that great report. I'm just curious about the safety of the airlines. We were saying that Delta is one of the safest. Are the other airlines trying to follow suit on that, or how are you keeping track of how all the measures that the airlines are doing to keep people safe on them?
Well, what we're doing so far with Delta is really the only airlines that's fully committed to not renting out that middle seat. Some of the others said they weren't going to rent out the middle seat, and then when it came time to fly, they were combining 2 flights into one. So, but most airlines are requiring masks and are doing additional cleaning, but there's not a lot that we can enforce. If the FAA doesn't do something universal, then all we can do is suggest. We passed a policy at the MAC for face coverings and social distances at the airport. And then the governor issued the mask ordinance. But we have installed 250 remote control hand sanitizers throughout the airport. We had a bunch that had to be touched by hand, and we thought that was a bad idea. So they took those out and they put in the ones that operate electronically. So there's 250 between the airlines and the airport. There's 250 places that you can get hand sanitizer as you're passing through the airport.
Thanks for doing all that, taking all those measures, and yeah, we just hope the other airlines follow suit if they want people to fly safe on them. So thank you.
It's a marketing, yeah. It's more of a marketing tool. Do you think they would use that as marketing? That if you want to fly and fly safe, fly us. So you should be advertising these things. When you're trying to get some tickets sold, push the safe flight.
Carl, I would agree with you there. I flew my dad back, my 93-year-old dad back from Arizona in May, and Delta had canceled the flight he was on, and so the timing didn't work, and I put him on American Airlines, who said they were going to have the middle seat open, and they did not. All their seats were full back then. So I'm with you. I'm going with those that market and then adhere to what they're marketing in flying, and Delta really has done a great job.
Yeah, thanks, Member Stevens. Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Peter Dugan. May I ask you a question of Carl? Carl, would you mind repeating the passenger percentages again that you started off with?
Year-to-date passenger totals are down 55%, but they include the months of January, February, and March. In the month of June, the domestic traveler was down 85%, and international travelers were down 99%. And then, I don't know if you want, Peter, if you need the number of flights.
Yes.
Domestic flights are, pardon me?
Yes, you mentioned the operations. That's the number of flights, correct?
Yes, operations are flights, and they're down. Domestic flights are down 69% for June, and 93% international for June.
Okay, thank you very much, Carl. And I was on a conference call today, and the Delta was brought up as a model for these particular passengers. They felt very comfortable on it. So thank you very much, Carl.
Member Hollinshead, did you have your hand up, or were you just adjusting your camera?
No, I did have my hand up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Member Crimmins, I've been researching the Real ID as well, and I read in one place that a passport still works without a Real ID after the deadline. Is that true, or am I mistaking that?
No, the Real ID, it just replaces the passport. If you don't want to be hauling your passport around for domestic travel, then you have the Real ID. But if you have your passport, that's fine. I just didn't want to have to haul my passport around. Knowing me, I'd lose it.
Okay.
On a domestic flight, so I thought I'd just bring a driver's license.
Thank you.
All right, good. Thanks, Member Crimmins, for that interesting update. Last agency report, Metropolitan Council Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've got a couple of things to go through. First of all, since we met last, I'm sure you've all heard the news, but the Southwest LRT full funding grant agreement was advanced from FTA to Congress for its 30-day notification on August 5th. We're still waiting to hear what the next results of that, but definitely a good positive step forward for the project, and we were really happy to see moving it over to Congress. Secondly, we are going through our budgeting process. Of course, we've talked a lot about some of the budget constraints we already had before the pandemic. We continue to have those constraints going forward, but our preliminary budget we're looking at reviewing right now. We will be able to manage with some of the lost revenues that we have, which is over 2 years anticipated $103 million in MVest and $138 million in passenger fares. But we have been able to, utilizing some reserves in the CARES Act funding, be able to plan on our budget for the remainder of 2020 and 2021. However, we do move, Metro Transit does move into a fiscal cliff in 2022 at this point. So certainly something we're keeping an eye on. The budget process, we will adopt our preliminary budget at the end of this month. It'll go out for public comment in October, and then we adopt our final budget in December. We've been very clear with our council members that that the budget will be somewhat fluid over the next few months as we get new information and we see what happens in our transit system and with the sales of cars. So next, we are, the chair wanted me to run through kind of where we are with service levels. We've service levels from over the last few weeks and said it's been fairly consistent. Our bus is down 63%. Blue line LRT is down 77%. Green line is down 70%. North Star is down 97%, and that reflects an overall on the system decrease in ridership right now of 67%. We are working now to look at kind of reallocating our service as we move into September. So we're trying to get back to basically 80% service levels, but it's going to be focused a little bit differently than we had done previously. Because what we're seeing is we are seeing ridership still happening on our local routes. We're finding that those are the communities that definitely need transit services, where commuter express and commuter rail are way down. So commuter and express is down to 25% of its normal level, and commuter rail is down to 33%. Whereas like we've got rates where we're looking at, as we roll things down, or as we go back, we're looking at having our BRTs at 100%, supporting local 98%, LRT 93%, core local 94%. So we're really focusing on those areas that we know need to have consistent transit service. The chair also mentioned talking about safe transit practices. Throughout the entire pandemic, we've been, there's a number of agencies that communicate with each other and communicate about best practices. We've been implementing best practices. We, continue, of course, mask wearing, but also trying to do our best to manage social distancing on our bus routes by realigning our fleet. So we've got the bigger buses on the busier routes, and we bring extra buses into service when we need to. So that's, it's been working fairly well, but it's certainly something that we continue to keep an eye on to make sure that we're operating a safe and reliable transit system.
All right, good. Thank you, Member Barber. Any questions for Member Barber? All right, very good. Thanks, everybody, for those reports.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Sanger.
Yeah, Member Sanger, go ahead.
Thank you. My question for Member for Deb is, with the full funding agreement having been advanced to Congress for Southwest, do they, if they want to object to it, do they have to have a vote of object to it, or can any one congressperson put a hold on it? What would stop it at this point? That's my question.
I am not sure I know completely the process. I wonder, is Nick on the line? I want to make sure we have it. I'm relaying the right information.
Oh,
yeah, this is Nick, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't believe, I'm not a real expert on the details of it, but I don't believe this individual congressperson can stop the process. It's a notification to Congress. So it is, I think we're at a really positive step here.
Okay. Thank you.
That prompt any other questions from members? All right, good. We'll move on. Minutes from June 17, 2020. Does anybody have any changes, additions? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of June 17, 2020.
So moved, Anderson.
Seconded by Bailey.
All right. Get that, Janice?
Yes, I got it. We're good.
All right. And any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to approval of the June 17, 2020 minutes.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey.
Aye.
Barber. Barber.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Boyles, Crimmins. Crimmins? Carl, are you there? Oh, you're still muted?
You're still mute. There you go.
Aye.
Thank you. DeGan,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye. Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens, Giuliani Stevens,
Aye.
Patel,
Aye.
Heyman Roland,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Goldberg,
Yes.
Hollensed,
Aye.
Karwoski,
Aye.
Lindeke, Lindeke,
I saw him there earlier.
Look,
Aye.
Malichnik,
Aye.
McGuire,
Aye.
Naryanan,
Aye.
Petrick,
Aye.
Reich,
Kevin? Remember right?
Sanger,
Aye.
Schumber,
Aye.
Stephenson,
Aye.
Swanson, Tolbert, Ulrich,
Aye.
Windshuttle,
Aye.
Washi,
Aye. Is that it, Jenna?
yes, unless Linda Key was able to unmute himself.
Okay. Member Lindeke, are you still with us? All right. All right, the minutes of June 17, 2020 stand approved. Thanks, Jenna. We've got two business items to take care of today before we get into the informational items. And Letha Fries, our TAC chair, has introductions on both of those matters. One is the 2020, 2026, 2021, 2024 potential acceptance of the tip public comments. Our TAC chair, Letha Fries, is with us, and I think maybe Joe Barbeau or Sarah Maskey somebody has a presentation from staff around this public comment, the public comments that were received.
Good afternoon. As you'll recall, federal regulations require that we develop a transportation improvement program every 4 years. The council develops this program every year in conjunction with the statewide transportation improvement program. The adoption of the final 2021 through 2024 tip is, as you mentioned, Chair, a separate action item on your agenda today. We did have a comment period that was 50 days. It started June 22nd and ended on August 10th. And there were a number of different ways that input was received, and I believe the report that staff is going to provide will go over that. So your action on this is to accept the public comment report. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff to share a summary of those comments.
Good. Thank you, Chair Fries. With respect to these two business items that we have, they're linked together. The first would be the potential acceptance of the tip public comments, and then we would vote on whether to adopt the 2021 through 24 tip. And so this is the first step in that process. And I'll turn it over now to staff.
Hi, this is Sarah Maskey. I am the Senior Communications Specialist that supports Metropolitan Transportation Services. Thank you for having me. Just to go over a little bit of the public comment process, Greg, could you forward to the next slide? Slide, please, Greg.
Did you want the summary is on the screen now, Ms. Maskey?
Oh, all right.
Maybe you can't see it, but we're looking at the tip public comment summary.
Got it now. It's showing up on my screen now.
Okay, good.
Just to give you an overall view of what we did, the number of people who were engaged in the process, we had 854 unique visitors to the web pages. Our Facebook reach was 1,805 users, and the engagement on Facebook, we had who did either liked, shared, commented on those posts, and the Twitter engagement, we had 35 users liking or sharing that information. So we had more than 200 stakeholders involved that resulted in over 400 comments. It's a little more than we're used to on the Transportation Improvement Program. On the final weekend, we had there was an advocacy notice that went out from the Sierra Club, and I would say roughly 175 of those commenters came in during that last weekend. So as you can imagine, that was a bit unexpected, but we'll go over kind of what those comments focused on. Had a public meeting at the Transportation Committee on, I forget the date exactly, mid-July. And the interest groups and agencies that engaged provided comments included Bikemen, Fresh Energy, Metro Transit, Minnesota Department of Transportation, Move Minnesota, St. Paul Bicycle Coalition, the Sierra Club, and Washington County. We used a web announcement and web page notice to highlight the public comment period, a GovDelivery email announcement, Facebook, Twitter, Star Tribune classified ad, and as I mentioned before, the public meeting. And we received comments through email, mail, and the public meeting. Next slide, please. Seems like it's taking a little time on my end.
Yeah, it's a real prompt on our end in terms of when you call for the next slide, it's right there.
Let me just go. Now it's up. All right, the key engagement themes. Racial equity and climate justice impacts should be included in the project decisions that appear in the Transportation Improvement Program. Roadways and highways, including HOV lanes, contributes to climate change. Focus investments instead on reducing emissions and vehicle miles traveled. Prioritize investments in clean transportation solutions, including electric vehicles, transit, and active transportation. Parking has many negative effects, including reduced housing affordability, flooding, air pollution, and heat island effect. And we had several residents in the northeast suburbs who are either opposed to the rush line itself or the current alignment. So those were some of the major themes that came out of that. None of these required any changes to projects, but I will turn this over to Amy Venowitz now, and she can talk about the responses.
Yes.
Ms. Maskey.
Mr. Chair and members, as Sarah indicated, this year we really received an unprecedented number of comments on the TIP. Very unexpected, and we are receiving similar comments for the Transportation Policy Plan update, which you will be receiving in an info item in September on that. So the comments were primarily general in nature, not necessarily specifically related to projects that are in the TIP or asking for adjustments to the TIP. And it is pretty difficult to make changes to the TIP in response to really high-level comments. And generally, once a project is in the TIP, it has funding that has been allocated either from MnDOT, from a local government, or through the regional solicitation or Metro Transit. And it's really pretty late in the process to begin to try to move projects around or shift funding between projects. So when we receive high-level policy comments, as I indicated, it's just really difficult to make adjustments in the tip, and the more appropriate place to really deal with these types of comments is in our policy documents, such as the Transportation Policy Plan, the update that will be coming to you, and also making adjustments in our project selection processes so that the comments are considered prior to actually making the project investment decisions. And so we will be considering these comments along with what was submitted for the TPP as we bring the TPP update to you, and hopefully making edits in the update to recognize these general comments. And then I would suggest that another place that we should be keeping these comments in mind is as we do make our investment decisions. So as we reevaluate the regional solicitation again in 2021, keeping these comments in mind will be important for thinking about how we want to invest the regional solicitation dollars. And then we will also be having conversations with Metro Transit and MnDOT as we think these comments also apply to their investment decision-making processes. So, you know, in short, we're not making any changes to the tip in response to these comments. You'll see them later in other processes, which we'll be bringing forward to you to review. So with that, either Sarah or I can take any questions about the comments in particular.
All right, good. Thank you, Ms. Benowitz. Are there questions for either Ms. Maskey or Ms. Benowitz?
This is Matt Hollinshead.
Pardon me?
Matt Hollinshead.
Yes, Member Hollinshead, thank you. Go ahead.
Just some housekeeping under the parking category of response. I noticed a comment number 191.6. I don't believe that commenter exists. I'm 191, so I didn't know whether that was from my comments or not. But I don't think I commented much on parking, so I just a tiny little detail there.
Matthews, this is Sarah Maskey. Just to reply to that, I did respond to your email. Point 6 just indicates that we broke up your comments into 6 different comments, and I failed to take off the point 6.
Okay.
The parking comment was embedded in the advocacy letter from the Sierra Club. So anybody who forwarded or signed on to that letter was added to that because it was substantially different than the expansion piece of that letter. So that is why that you are on both.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Hollinshead. Other
Mr.
members?
Chair.
With the screen up, would you please identify yourselves? It's hard to see who's wanting to speak up. Was it Member Foster?
Commissioner Holberg.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick, in these summary documents, it would be helpful to quantify the comments from the advocacy organizations as a part of that overview, so that we would be more able to see the breakout of what were generated as a lobbying effort by an advocacy group, as opposed to more organic, maybe, comments.
Ms. Maskey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Member noted. I will take a look at that, but primarily the two that came from the advocacy organization was the roadway expansion category and the parking category. Those were the two. As you can see, all the numbers of comments were on those. So, but I can spell it out a little bit more clearly in the text.
I just think it provides a clearer picture. I know we do that at Dakota County when we get these generated bulk email lobbying efforts, to kind of group those in and count those together is helpful in evaluating where the comments came from, if you will.
Commissioner, are you suggesting that they be clustered in a certain way or just by organization?
Well, how we do it in Dakota County is they'll say the total number of contacts, and they'll say, so 177 were generated from an email blast from Sierra Club or a conservation group, or, you know, name your group, given the issue. But then you kind of have an idea of who's behind some of the mass email response. They have an ability to kind of flood the inbox, if you will, and to know that that portion of those number of emails come out of that particular effort is helpful.
All right, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Member Narayanan.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would just like some more clarity around the purpose of the comments, if you will. It seemed to me that if we're not necessarily making any changes as a result of a large number of comments, maybe we need to have comments early on in the process, perhaps, or were we looking more for specific project-related comments? I'm just trying to understand for next year, how do we make sure that folks who are actually commenting have their voice be, you know, reflected in the nature of the projects themselves eventually?
Sure, I'll take that and see if Sarah wants to add on. So we definitely can change the tip. So I don't want to give the impression that it's not a document that can be changed at this point, but it's difficult to do when the comment itself is more general in nature and not either supporting or not supporting specific projects. And I think TAB in the past, just a couple of years ago, actually did remove a project from the tip. So the purpose of the comment process for the tip is really to focus on the actual projects that have already been selected for funding. And I think that's a valid thing to ask for public input on. I think what I was trying to indicate, though, is when we have general thoughts and a way to think about investing or shifting investment from mode to mode or towards particular purposes, comments such as that are more easily addressed at the beginning of the funding processes, which let's just take the regional solicitation, for example. That would be when TAB is setting up the process for scoring, looking at criteria and weighting and level of scores. And then also when TAB is looking at across the funding categories, how to spend money in the different funding categories. So I think, and we did have an internal discussion on this, that what would be beneficial is along the way when we are developing something such as the regional solicitation to have multiple public engagement points throughout the process. And we do put the regional solicitation application package out for public engagement. And that would be a point where getting comments about shifting investment from category to category would be appropriate. There are other funding processes that probably also need to do the same thing, where prior to actually selecting or releasing the application, they have some method of getting public engagement in a general sense of where people would like the money focused. Does that get to your point?
Yes, thank you. Could I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so with the, was there such a process for the regional solicitation for this round of regional solicitation when we had an opportunity to comment on maybe a more general version of where we should be spending money? It was before my time, so I just want clarity there.
Yes, we did. Before we released the application package, we put the whole package out for public comment, and part of that does include an indication of how we're going to spend money across the categories, and it includes all of the scoring measures and criteria that will be used. I can see Sarah wants to respond too here.
Members, if I could just add, I do see this as an opportunity to do more robust engagement along the way as we are doing, especially as we're going into the development of the 2050 transportation policy plan. When you get an advocacy group who is putting out a call, a specific topic area, it often means that they feel like they're not being heard. And I think we have an opportunity over the next 4 years as we are working on the next transportation policy, more intentional about talking to some of these groups about not only the purpose of the different plans or programs that we have in place, but also sure that their input is coming in at the very forefront of those processes. And so I do see this as a really a good opportunity for us to really engage with these groups. Thank you.
Mayor Hovland?
Yeah, yes.
This is Sue Sanger. I don't have a question. I just have a follow-up comment where I really appreciate the comments by both Ms. Vanovitz and Ms. Maskey about the future application of these comments. And my suggestion actually would be to go a step further than what either of them have said so far, which is that not today, but going forward, we should consider in the regional solicitation having a separate category with its own scoring, so that for climate change issues and environmental issues, so that then those concerns are clearly weighted into the final scoring result.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Thank you for that. With respect to the tip, either Ms. Maskey or Ms. Venowitz, hasn't there been, in the past, didn't the comments, the public comments, get appended to the back of the document? You know, so what we're getting from you is a staff recommendation that none of those 400 plus comments warranted changing any of the substantive language of the document itself. And that's what Ashwat is wondering. Well, how, I thought, you know, I think maybe putting words in his mouth, but I think he's wondering, well, isn't that the job of the tab to decide? We should be looking at those comments and deciding if we want to adopt any of them into the tip instead of just accepting the staff recommendation that there's nothing of sufficient merit to warrant changing the tip. That's kind of what I see as the issue that he's raising. Where is our input from a tab standpoint on whether or not the comments from public commenters should result in a change in the language in the tip?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll take that. Maybe Sarah can add on. You're correct that we usually have an appendix with the actual comments themselves in there as PDFs. You know, recognizing that in the past it's been anywhere from 0 to 10 comments. And given that these came in and they were so overwhelming and late in the process, and we're working remote, that getting those all in a format where you could actually read the comments as an appendix was difficult. And I think what we opted for instead is a link in the document, or it's maybe not a link, maybe just the ability to request the comments, and we can get the actual wording of the comments to you. So what we're doing is going through a process of reading all the comments and sorting them into similar comments that have the same theme, and that's what you're seeing in the document that we have produced at this point. Now, TAB definitely can today have a discussion as to whether there is something specific in the tip that could be changed in response to these comments. I think as staff, we are suggesting that that's kind of a difficult thing to do, given that they're general in nature and not related to specific projects. I should also add that we did get comments from MnDOT and FHWA that were specific to projects in the TIP. They're very technical in nature, and those requested changes and edits are being made based on their comments. Do you want to add anything here, Sarah?
No, I do not have anything to add.
Well, I think, I mean, when you look at the totality of the comments here, I think what, and Member Sanger too, what she's saying is that these comments have value in terms of how we shape the next regional solicitation. If we're getting a lot of comments from people that are saying from a racial equity standpoint and a climate change standpoint, we need to be addressing those impacts more deeply more significantly in the regional solicitation. That's something that TAB would want to consider. But there's got to be a basis from which you pull that information. And I think what Ashwat is suggesting is that, you know, maybe you take this, you're reading all of these comments, you've done a summary of some of the comments. And one of those summarizations was the one I just articulated, that race equity and climate change ought to be studied for their impact or be included because their impacts are significant. You know, could you do it in a way where you append to the back a summary of the comments that were made? And to Commissioner Holberg's point, you point out who had those common comments. And then we've got a document that we can turn to in the future when we go to work on the regional solicitation that reflects some of those comments from the public that may or may not have been incorporated into the TIP itself, but at least they're there for reference, and we've got something to reference to when we go to look at the regional solicitation work we're going to do. That, I mean, that's kind of what I'm reading out of the totality of the comments here.
Mr. Chair and members, I do want to be clear. If you open the business item and you continue to scroll down, there is a public comment document in there that summarizes all the comments and the commenter numbers and names. So did you see that summary? It's multiple pages.
All right.
It just does not, the one thing it does not have at this point is the actual PDFs of the comments as they were submitted, but the summaries and the listing of commenters and responses to all of the comments is in the document.
But you're not intending to append it?
With the actual comments themselves.
Yeah, so I mean, if we get to the next matter, which is the adoption of the TIP for 2021 through 2024, and we say append that information to the back of the TIP, you could do that.
Chair, I can respond to that. Yes, all of the comments were entered into a spreadsheet. So the full comments exist in a spreadsheet that could be downloaded and appended to the document if that is what you would like.
Yeah, well, let's have that discussion. That's not my decision to make. But Commissioner Karwoski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I completely agree with your original point. I think for transparency, it would be nice to append these to the document as written. I think to have a recommendation from staff and have a summary with so many comments would be helpful, but I think for transparency, I think it's really important to have them listed and easily accessible.
It sounds like they're all in spreadsheet form, so it won't be that difficult. Mayor?
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I concur. I think you make a very good point about transparency, Commissioner, and I think today more than ever we need to make sure that public's comment is something that is available. So thank you. I agree with.
Commissioner McGuire, you had your hand up, I think.
Oh, Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do agree with everything that's been said, and I really appreciate this conversation and Member Ashwat for bringing this up. And so I have a couple of comments on our outreach for these comments, and I know this goes to a conversation we're going to have later, but it's really about how we solicit input earlier on with our TPP. But it would seem to me that whoever we've solicited input from at TPP would be the ones we go back to for the tip. So when I see the list of the outreach on this, I don't see as many groups as I might want to see. And I'm wondering if we engage more groups in the TPP, and then these are just the ones that now re-engaged for the tip. But I'm curious about our outreach and whether we're reaching underserved communities and who we're going to. And it seems as though, because we've got this influx of comments late in the process, these were groups that didn't feel that they were reached beforehand, or maybe weren't reached when we were doing the TPP. So I have this general question about our outreach, how we're really addressing these communities that maybe don't know about going onto Facebook or going onto some of these sites and finding us. Are we reaching out to them? So I have that's sort of my general series of questions about the whole outreach, and how when we are to this late point in the process, which is the TPP, or no, the TIP, this late point, it feels like those aren't as many groups as I might like to have been engaged with us on this. And so I just have a general question of how are we doing this engagement? And you're probably going to tell me, well, it needed to happen at TPP, but my mind is going in the same direction as some of these previous comments about how are we engaging people.
All right, that's a fair question. And you did talk, Ms. Maskey, about the methodology used and the comments that came in. I think it was impressive, but nonetheless, the commissioner has a concern over the extent of our outreach and the effort that we make beyond just electronic methodology.
Mm-hmm. And underserved communities, underserved communities. Yeah.
Chair and Member McGuire, absolutely agree with you. Having been here 2 years and participating in the 2018 update kind of at the tail end of the TPP, so a little bit on not on the decision-making side, but on the kind of activation side, and doing the outreach for the 2020 update for the TPP. As we go into the next phase, as we're going into a major update for the 2050 TPP, that will be a key. One of the reasons I brought this up, as we see this as an opportunity, and just to say that all of the folks that we reached out to, while we didn't do outreach to specific groups, all of those groups were included in our outreach for GovDelivery, on our email lists, on our on our different sources of sending information, our newsletter, those types of things. But we did not engage specifically with any one group as doing a presentation or those kinds of things. But as we update for the TPP, that is certainly our plan, and we haven't put that in writing or put that in place as of yet. And of course, this is a drive process, so that's going to be a much larger process than just transportation. But I believe that group is convening soon to talk about how we manage the outreach over the course of the 2050 TPP. And we are definitely focused on outreach to those who have perhaps not participated widely in the past, and making sure that they have a unique opportunity to participate. So I agree with you 100% and think we can always do better.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Commissioner, any follow-on? Commissioner McGuire, anything further on that issue? Oh. Ms. Maskey, what I'm thinking is that maybe when this group meets and you come up with your communication.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Anything further?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I was off mute. I'm just thank you for that. And I feel like we have been talking about this for a while, so maybe that would be a good thing for us to see this. You know, I think we've all been saying we want to reach underserved communities, we want to reach specific groups, and so it's hard to have it come back to us this way and then say, wait, we thought we were reaching out to people. So yeah, however we can be earlier on in the process to catch these things would be a good thing.
All right, good. Commissioner, what I hear you saying, and Ms. Maskey, I think when this group meets and you discuss your outreach or communication strategy, why don't you bring it to the tab in advance so that we can look at it before you go ahead and make that outreach effort, and so we can make sure that we're comfortable with it as well, and that all of our members are comfortable with the strategies employed and put our blessing on it. Is that a fair way to state it?
Thank you, Chair, members. That is, I'm more than happy to do that.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Maskey.
Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Chris Geisler.
Yes, Member Geisler.
The one comment I would add to that is, you know, we've made some significant changes in our equity outreach plan for the regional solicitation of what we're expecting counties and cities to do as far as how they're outreaching there. We should be able to model that. And we should model the exact behavior that we want those cities and counties to follow with our own outreach programs. So if somebody follows that, that's what it should be. Because that's the best way to show what we want them to do. And if I might add just on a second one, I would be in support of a more digital option to go find, here's the full verbose 400 pages of comments, but an attached summary, so that if somebody decides to print off the whole thing, we're not wasting tree after tree after tree, just from a readability perspective for the layman reading it. But I do think having all of the comments available from a public perspective in a verbose sense is a good way to make sure that when we come back around to say, we're making these changes because of this stack of papers that we received, we can directly point to that and people can see those comments. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that you're saying the same thing we're thinking in a different way. So thank you for that add-on comment, Member Geisler.
Thank you, Chair, if I could.
Yes.
The comments have all been entered actually into a SharePoint site, so it is possible to share that from a digital standpoint. So I make it an external facing page. Currently, it's an internal facing page, and I can do both. I can certainly download it into an Excel spreadsheet and make a PDF. But I'm happy to explore putting the SharePoint site and making that available.
All right, thank you for that ingenuity on your part. I think we all are appreciative of that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This is Amy. I just wanted to clarify one thing. The motion and the action you're currently working on is acceptance of the public comment report. And so I think what you would want to do at this point is move acceptance with the addition that directing staff to add the full text of the comments as an appendix to the report, or maybe alternatively making the full comments available through the SharePoint site. So I think this motion is more appropriate to amend than the next motion, which is the adoption of the TIP itself.
Well, yeah, I'd like a clarification on that, because I was thinking about dealing with this issue in the next matter, which it seemed to me was if we're adopting the 2021 through 2024 TIP, that would be the document to which we would append the PDF. Now we're accepting all these 400 plus public comments, and I don't see where, it seems to me like it's more appropriate to do what you're discussing in the next matter as opposed to this matter. But if you think otherwise, or we should do it both ways for clarification, then would you restate that, please, Ms. Venowitz?
The motion you're currently working on is acceptance of the public comment report. which is attached to the business item. And I think what I'm hearing you say is you would like that report to include the full text of the comments received. And then that report goes online on the regional solicitation website. The tip itself goes to the Federal Highway Administration and MnDOT, so I'm not sure that we need to append the text of all of the comments to the document that we send into the feds for approval. But I think we could do it either way. It just might be cleaner to have it as a separate public comment report along with the actual comments themselves.
Yeah, we can do that. And I mean, internally, what you want to do in terms of who you want to send it to, I mean, if you want to send a more abbreviated, a truncated version to the feds, to me, that's your decision. I think the decision we're trying to make is when we look at a motion that says accept the tip public comments, I think for all of us that are looking at that language on the agenda, it means accept all those public comments. It doesn't say accept the report. But if we want to accept the report and all of the public comments, then we'll make it a little bit broader motion. And so I will ask now, is there someone who wishes to make a motion to accept the tip public comment report and the tip public comments for the 2021 through 2024 Transportation Improvement Program?
Mr. Chair, I will make that. I'll make that motion.
Second, Maluchnik, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Member Reich.
Thank you. By way of comment, now that we're in the comment phase, I would also suggest that not only do we have this as a communication piece internally and externally for this report, but that staff would use this as an initial conversation starter for our subsequent broader planning exercises. It seems that is where these comments could be very powerful in adjusting policy. So let's make it a suggestion that not only do we have it for this exercise, but that we already agree that it will be front and center as part of any next policy setting exercise we have for our other documents that we approve.
Yep, I think that's a good piece of advice. All right. Any other comments or questions with regard to the motion? Although, let's see, a roll call with respect to my concerns.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles. Crimmins.
Aye.
Dugan. Dugan.
Peter Dugan.
Foster.
Aye. Aye. I had
Fox. We got you, Peter. Fox.
Fox is aye.
Geisler.
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Gotell.
Aye.
Hammond Roland.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Holberg.
Yes.
Hollinshead.
Aye.
Karwoski.
Aye.
Lindeke.
Aye.
Look.
Aye.
Maluchnik.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye.
Narayanan.
Aye.
Aye.
Petrick.
Aye.
Reich.
Aye.
Singer.
Aye.
Schember.
Aye.
Stephenson.
Aye.
Swanson. Tolbert. Ulrich.
Yes.
Aye. Ulrich, aye.
Yes.
Windshuttle.
Aye.
Washi.
Aye.
And that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ernst. The motion to accept public comments and the public comment report to the 2021 through 2024 Transportation Improvement Program is approved. Thank you. Let's move on then to the next item. Chair Freeze has this from an introductory standpoint as well, and that is the potential adoption of the 2021 to 2024 TIP, recommending it for approval to the Metropolitan Council. Chair Freeze.
Okay. As we've been talking about here, we're moving forward with adopting the TIP. This is the 21 through 24 Transportation Improvement Program. And just recapping the process it's been through, it went to TAC Funding and Programming on May 21st. The Technical Advisory Committee reviewed and recommended that it be moved out for public comment on June 3rd. It was released for public comment on June 18th with a hearing being held at the Transportation Committee on September 24th. Or wait, September, that hasn't happened yet. Went back at their, I believe in their August. And now, actually it was probably in July. And so now you would be moving forward with recommending approval of it at this time.
Questions for Chair Freeze? Chair Freeze, was there an intention to have Mr. Barbeau make any sort of supplemental staff presentations?
I believe he's available for comments if necessary, but I'm not aware if he's giving a presentation.
All right. Do any of our tab members have questions for either Ms. Venowitz or excuse me, Chair Freeze, Ms. Venowitz, or for Joe Barbeau? It strikes me that what we want to be doing here is that we want to recommend adoption of the 2021 through 2024 TIP with the public comments appended there too. Just to kind of take a belt and suspenders sort of approach on this matter. So is there a motion to that effect?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second, Commissioner Gotell.
Who is the mover?
Dick.
Say again.
Malushnik with an M.
Oh, Commissioner Malushnik made the motion. Thank you. Second by Commissioner Gotell. All right. Any further discussion with regard to the motion as stated? Ms. Ernst, roll call, please.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey.
Aye.
Barber. Barber.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles. Crimmins.
Aye.
Dugan.
Aye.
Esther.
Aye.
Fox.
Aye.
Geisler.
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Gotell.
Aye.
Hammond Roland.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Holberg. Holberg, one more time.
Yes.
Hollinshead.
Aye.
Karwoski.
Aye.
Lindeke.
Aye.
Look.
Aye.
Malushnik.
Aye.
McDonald. McGuire. Mary Jo.
McGuire says aye.
Narayanan.
Aye.
Patrick. Patrick. Reich.
Member Reich? Kevin Reich?
Aye. Stanger.
Aye.
Schember.
Aye.
Stephenson.
Aye.
Swanson. Tolbert.
Yes.
Ulrich.
Aye.
Windshuttle.
Aye.
Washi.
Aye.
That's it, Chair.
All right, thank you. The motion as stated is approved. Thank you, everybody. Now we're going to move on to informational items, and then we had talked about in the chair's report some of the issues around the ABRT matter that we discussed, the F line, and I think Nick's going to talk about some proposed process modifications that were addressed with our working group, which was Commissioner Gattell, Amity Foster, Member Reich, Commissioner McGuire, Deb Barber, Molly Cummings from the council, and Member Hollinshead was there as well. If I missed somebody, I apologize for that. I think Rachel Workenoff, the TAC, was there as well.
Mr. Chair, Heyman Roland.
Oh yes, Mary Heyman Rowland was there. Yes, how could I forget? Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, my sidekick.
Forget.
So Nick Thompson, why don't you go ahead and tell the tab a little bit about what some of the issues were that we were addressing in the working group, and the reason why we thought the full tab needed to be dealing with this matter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we recap last year, the policymaker work group met 7 times to go through a variety of policy recommendations that TAB would adopt for the regional solicitation. And one of the most major changes this time around was the creation of the Arterial BRT program that would allow the TAB to fund up to $25 million for up to one full ABRT. And I think the goal of that coming out of that was that rather than piecemeal funding the ABRT over a few years, TAB could fully fund one of the ABRT lines, which the next line will be called the F line. That has not been identified yet. And as part of that process, we, Metro Transit, agreed to a public input process. I think is a really good, valuable timing of this in light of the discussion we just had about tip comments and getting good public engagement, which is why we wanted to come back here. That whole process was to go out and develop a series of priorities around the ABRT program, update the ABRT study that had been done in 2011 to make sure that the right ABRT lines were prioritized in the region. And that included a very extensive public engagement process that TAB was going to be part of. And of course, everything that's happened since this spring has really completely disrupted the timeline for effective public engagement on this program. And so rather than completing it and coming to TAB with what the outline recommendation is later this fall, Charles Carlson is going to go through a process that kind of describes what the original schedule was and what a proposed new schedule is. That I think, looking at what the policymaker group discussed last year and what has been discussed by TAB for public engagement over the last couple meetings, I think this still meets the spirit of everything that we wanted to achieve with the ABRT program and regional solicitation, but does allow for better public input than if we try to continue on the same schedule. And so we reconvened the policymaker group 2 weeks ago, as the chair mentioned, because we knew this was a change for what was recommended and adopted. And we wanted to make sure that TAB was fully on board with that and understood why before we started to go through the committee process to make the actual motion and change, which will come back to TAB in September. If there's good input today that supports that direction. And so that's a general overview, and then I will turn it over to Charles to go through the presentation and really kind of discuss in detail, including showing where we're at with the ABRT and what lines are being considered. TAB is one of the first groups that's going to see this information. It's very fresh information, and I think it's so fresh that we expect that even some of the maps that you see today will be changing as we get public input. But we wanted to make sure that we were keeping you in the loop because you made such a strong commitment to this program, and this is a change from what was agreed to, but hopefully you understand with everything that's been impacted with engagement that this change still makes sense, and I think allows TAB to really weigh in on what the F line should be and the public. So I'll turn it over to Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Chair and TAB members. My name is Charles Carlson. I'm the Director of Bus Rapid Transit Projects for Metro Transit. Next slide. So just a quick reminder that the regional solicitation has been instrumental in funding the 2 successful bus rapid transit lines that we have implemented. These funds, because we identify them early through the regional solicitation, help us invest our own funds to develop the projects. They leverage the final funds that we often are seeking to make the projects a reality, and then they've been transformative investments for the communities that we serve. Next slide. And the next slide illustrates the ridership benefits that accrue from these investments. So with the A-Line project on Snelling Avenue, we saw an immediate jump in growth and continued growth across the years that it's been in operation. We opened the Metro C line last year, and we've seen significant growth as well, jump of more than 30%, and the C line now is one of our top 5 bus routes. Commenting on the COVID impacts of this, we continue to operate at 100% of our service levels from pre-COVID on these lines. We also have retained more than half of the riders on these lines combined. So Councilmember Barber noted that the bus system is down about 63% overall. The arterial BRT system continues to operate successfully with over half the passengers remaining. Next slide. So this shows the context that we're fitting future planning for arterial BRT into. We've begun a process of a 20-year future vision for our bus system called Network Next. This is centered on the bus system within Metro Transit service area. It focuses on where we would expand and grow our system over time, and would identify specific improvements that we could make along the way. And there's really been 3 pillars of Network Next that we've identified, and some of these have been disrupted. So the first pillar is our existing policy guidance from the Metropolitan Council. In green on this slide is the performance of our current network, which has changed significantly, and then outreach and engagement with communities that we serve. And we've done some initial good work in pulling these items together. However, we've seen a significant change over the last several months, both from the pandemic and from other civil unrest. So next slide just indicates some of the particular outreach circumstances that have been challenging. So when the pandemic hit, we were immediately faced with challenges to continue outreach that had been in planning and underway. As the summer continued, we've also seen really, significant increases in the expectations for authentic and robust community engagement. So we've been kind of hit by 2 sides of this. One is a suspension of the engagement that we could do just because of the pandemic. The other is an interruption of robust and authentic engagement we've been planning to do, but really couldn't because of the broader circumstances that we're facing, particularly in our core service areas. So what we've done is we've begun a broader conversation beyond this future BRT planning that is underway. There's actually an open survey right now that folks could respond to. In addition to that, we're doing on-the-street engagement with our riders about the broader needs and the challenges that they're facing in this moment. With that opened up, we feel that we're reaching the point of re-engaging folks around specifically BRT planning here in 2020 before we're moving out into sharing the very specific plans, as Nick had mentioned. The tab will see the preview of some of the first products today as we prepare to launch that beginning next week. Next slide, please. So what we, as Nick said, we've proposed, or we are proposing a couple modifications. One is that we've developed an and launched a expanded community engagement response. So that is active now. We're also proposing that we hold both the guiding framework document that we had been working on, as well as local and express bus planning until next year. We really need more time to see how the pandemic effects, either continuing or recovery, will occur on our local and particularly our express bus system before we would be in a position to advance the planning of those routes. However, we do want to continue the development of arterial BRT so that we can select the F line and have a defined home for the regional solicitation funding targeted for this program. We would be advancing that selection based on what we do know so far on existing policy, bus network performance, and outreach and engagement. The next slide shows how this would play out. So initially we had planned to develop a 2040 local and express bus network. From that network, we would be selecting arterial BRT lines and then advancing that to TAB for investment consideration. With the pandemic effects and the other challenges that we've been facing, we've actually proposed to reverse these processes. We would continue BRT planning. We have the infrastructure in place to advance that work now. That would lead to an updated arterial BRT network that we would be developing and finalizing early next year. On hold would be the guiding framework, which would then lead to the local and express bus planning that will continue next year. Next slide. So the request to TAB, and I'll go into a couple more details after this, but just to lay out what the request is, we're requesting that TAB defer the selection of the F-line from December 2020 to April 2021. And instead of that timeline, we would be bringing updates to TAB as planning is continuing so that we can complete additional public engagement. So today we're sharing the initial corridors and what we've looked at for what would advance. We propose that in December, at the time of project selection, we'd be sharing the top tier of corridors. One of those would become the F-line, but additional engagement across the early part of 2021 is an effort that we would share with TAB. We would then bring the F-line project to TAB for confirmation and incorporation in the draft 22 to 25 tip. So in August, we will be sharing items today and then be bringing an action transmittal that will begin the process with funding and programming actually tomorrow and then make its way to the TAB next month. Next slide. The benefits of pursuing this additional engagement are significant. So, and really are what we would expect for any kind of acceptable community engagement process. We have been significantly impacted, and to make up the schedule in order to hit the initial plan of selecting the F-line in December would really limit engagement. So only a couple weeks at each phase, especially at the point of actually selecting the F-line, really minimal engagement. With what we're proposing, we can actually very significantly increase the timeline as well as some iterations in the discussion. So we would have 6 weeks beginning next week for the BRT corridor screening step. That would help shape those corridors much more significantly. The development and evaluation would continue, and I think that would begin with the presentation to TAB in December of the top tier of candidates. So these are the top 3. One of these will become the F-line, and then time in early 2021 would be afforded under the schedule modification to have substantial input on which of those lines in that top tier should become the F-line. Next slide. So we feel that this schedule change better aligns with TAB outreach and public engagement goals, and I think that certainly aligns with the spirit of discussion today relative to the tip. It will allow more meaningful engagement on how we should evaluate and prioritize these corridors so that we can look at beyond just the typical factors in selecting a line and really get the full picture based on public input. And then finally, especially from that top tier, we would have time to vet, discuss, and have robust engagement toward the selection and the investment decision that PAB would make for the 25 million going into the F-line project. Next slide. So within that, I'll pivot and just give a quick update, and then we'll return to the requested action that will be in front of TAB next month. This is an update to show that we are making technical progress on these corridors and preparing to launch outreach. So we've identified 19 corridors that we are screening to carry forward in the program. These are based on initial things we heard, both from the public and our stakeholder partners, from Met Council policy and from the current network performance. So the network performance prior to the pandemic in this case. We identified these 19 lines based on our existing high frequency network, our existing high ridership corridors that we'd studied in previous studies or iterations of this type of network level planning. And then finally, network balance to ensure that we're designing a comprehensive network that will serve our service area within the region. Next slide. So we can't implement 20 new arterial BRT corridors by 2040. So one thing that we'll be developing is a screening and applying this to those corridors to develop the roughly 10 or 11 that we could create concept plans for and then move forward in our process. So the way that we've developed that is shown here as we're applying it. Part of this is to ensure the long-term growth of our bus network. So this would be looking at BRT in corridors that have robust existing service. Building on success to grow ridership looks at current usage, and this really closely aligns with the regional solicitation scoring criteria that where about 30% is usage, and that aligns with what's identified here. But it's not all just ridership. So there's a lot of factors that go into the potential success of transit. Current ridership is just one of them. The other factors on here look at other factors, and that actually comprises a majority share of the screening criteria. So looking at the land uses, both existing and planned, are a significant piece of our screening factors, and then advancing equity and reducing disparities. So looking at the riders of these routes and the share of our riders that are people of color or people experiencing poverty. And that comes together to round out the score-based method. Following the application of those initial scores, we also looked at what are the roles in the network. How does this route fit in as a BRT route? How are people currently using transit in these different corridors? Are they long trips or short trips? What are the factors involved? Looking at the underlying route design, a lot of the work we do in BRT planning is to straighten out a route and speed it up. And some routes lend themselves toward that, others really do not. And then finally, regional balance. So ensuring that we have a representative and appropriate mix of transit investment across the region. Next slide. So when we apply those factors, and this is, TAB is probably the first audience to see this. We have a number of discussions beginning and underway with staff and other folks around the region, including from many of the TAB member organizations. But we've identified from this screening 11 corridors that would advance. These are balanced across the region. So we have a number of East Metro and West Metro, and they're also balanced across the role in the network. So it's not just core radial routes in and out of downtown. There's a number of those, but we're looking at corridors that would be suburb to suburb, We're looking at suburb-to-suburb connections on radial routes. We're looking at crosstown service that you wouldn't need to go downtown, and you could connect across several lines to get to different destinations. So these shown in green are the corridors that we're proposing will advance, and we're beginning, as I mentioned, discussion around these as well. Next slide. This is just more of a narrative list of the corridors shown in the preceding slide in the map, just to give a sense of the start and end point and the different routes that we're considering. Some of these corridors are also proposed or planned for study through other projects, and I think we'll be discussing in quite a bit more detail how to best capture those. It's possible a corridor like West 7th Street may be studied in more depth on the Riverview process and may not be studied in significant depth in this process, as one example. But those are conversations that are just on the forefront of beginning as we begin to sort this out, and certainly additional time as proposed in the schedule allows for those conversations and evaluations to occur. Next slide. So our next steps are to sort these 11 corridors into tiers after we develop concept plans for them and evaluate them, of course, beginning with immediate discussion around these lines. We would be selecting then the F-line corridor from the top tier of candidates. We'd share that top tier in the December timeframe, and then really begin this robust and iterative public engagement process beginning next week, and then seeking input, both open comments on the corridors that we're proposing will advance. How should we evaluate and prioritize as we move from a screening to a selection? And then how should we, from the top corridors, choose the F-line for TAB's consideration and investment? So next slide. So just in conclusion, this is a repeat of the TAB request that will be coming back next month, and I'd certainly welcome any input or questions today. But we're requesting that TAB defer that selection from December to April, that in December we would share the top tier of corridors, and then following robust public engagement, connect with TAB for a decision and confirmation in April of 2021 so that it can be incorporated in the TIP moving forward. With that, Mr. Chair, thank you again for the time today, and for the working group members, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, it's a very nice presentation, Mr. Carlson. I'm sure there are questions from our TAB members. It is interesting, I think, what the pandemic and the civil unrest has created in terms of silver linings, if you will. But I think the engagement opportunities here with respect to BRT planning make more sense and align more with how elected officials generally do things, is to get advice on things first, and then instead of trotting out a project and saying, how do you like it? Get input on what you might like first before you pick one. Commissioner Karwoski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Charles. Good presentation. I also was serving on that policy work group that we met the last week or the week before that advanced the recommendation to delay the decision from December to April to get more citizen review, which I think is very good for transparency. So I'm fully supportive. I just wanted to comment, I know for Washington, so Washington County is fully supportive of this delay. We are disappointed, but for now accepting that for the regional balance, our Century Avenue line was dropped. Just wanted to point out a few things. It would have connected, it will connect Gold Line to Rush Line. It'll serve a lot of needy people on Century Avenue. It will serve 3M. It will serve Century College. So we're disappointed it didn't meet the criteria, but I think there'll be years to come here to plan, and we'll just have to beef up our planning. So, but in spite of that, I think it's a good decision to move this F-line along with the delay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you for that comment. Member Barber.
Thank you.
And then Commissioner McGuire after Member Barber. Member Barber,
Okay.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to thank Charles and his team. I think they took a real thoughtful approach to this conversation, and I think the strategy of splitting out the prioritization of the ABRT lines and to build out that program and Network Next makes a lot of sense. I think that it's really given us an opportunity to sort of integrate some of the transit values that we have been working on, and was almost on a parallel path to Network Next, where now we can integrate some of that into this work. And I think even how the waiting for the screening of the lines is really reflective of that work. I was really happy to see coming out of the work group for the policy, the real strong continued support for ABRT and this program, but still being mindful that it is really the right thing to do to take a pause to make sure we're getting the right kind of comments and the right kind of public engagement. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Barber. Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also appreciate all the work. I have a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. I appreciate that I had brought this up during the policy, during the work group presentation about some of our projects, like on West 7th, actually being part of a larger project on Riverview. So we'll be assessing that project with the Riverview project. And I'm happy, so I'm glad we brought that up because we need to be aware of that. But I'm glad we're seeing some East Metro projects here. I know it's good to have regional balance in this, and I'm just going to give a shout out to, the Rice Robert. I'm just glad that we are seeing these lines that are really instrumental in helping us have regional balance and getting these transportation lines throughout the region. I'm wondering who's making these original decisions. Can you remind me who's going to bring them to us? Like, who does the vetting for getting these people on the list in the first place, and then how do we have more impact? I'm guessing you're going to put it out to all of our counties, and we're going to make best cases for what we want to see. And I'm hoping that we will have a citizen engagement process or an engagement process like what we were talking about earlier with our TIP program about how we want to be more deliberate about reaching out to underserved communities and all of that. So those are my series of questions about how are we doing the outreach for this, who's making the initial decisions on it, and and how do we all have as much impact and input as we'd like on this? Because I have, obviously I have comments in support of some of these projects. So.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner McGuire. Back on slide 11, we had shown the map of corridors that were identified. So to get to the, where do the lines come from? Again, it was our high frequency network, our high ridership corridors, corridors that have been previously studied, and then consideration of network balance. So that's how we developed that initial list. The screening criteria we then developed so it's really based on those aspects that are grounded in Met Council policy, as well as just the performance of our network. The screening criteria then were identified from some of the engagement that we had been able to do in 2019. And the big themes of the engagement were to build on success, to develop a network that supports a transit-oriented lifestyle, to advance equity and reduce disparities. And we're very glad to see that those also aligned pretty well with PAB scoring criteria for the regional solicitation. So we feel that as a region, things are fairly well aligned so far. The Met Council would be the body to select the F line following this process, but really the intent is that this is robust engagement, both with the public, especially focused on our riders and people who depend on transit services, but also with our stakeholders and our policy partners.
Thank you. So we'll stay connected with our Met Council members, and of course be part of this process as we as we move forward in this. And I do support the delay. I think we can use this as an opportunity, obviously, to engage more of the public. And I think they are finding ways to be more engaged, even virtually. We've been finding that some of our town hall meetings have been more well attended virtually because people can get there without transportation or childcare issues. So I'm just glad that we're going to be doing that. And I'm confident that the Met Council will have a really robust engagement process, and we'll be giving our input to our Met Council members on that. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Mayor Stephenson and then Member Foster.
Thank you, Mayor Hovland. I just was going to say, I think that the regional balance is important to consider. I think one of the concerns that I have for my neighboring communities is that the Botano Boulevard LRT line has now been put into some type of further state of hold or consideration, given the BNSF issue has been unable to be resolved, and so they're trying to figure out what to do with that line. I know that's going back to be discussed about whether or not they're going to look at an alternative route through North Minneapolis. And as we move forward, I think it's important to realize that because of that, the LRT line may be delayed, and we need to consider that further than those neighboring communities in Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park who have the high minority community that really is dependent upon the transit lines to get places. How do we look at that?
Good, thank you, Mayor. Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I fully support the delay. I think we're not at a time where we can do like haphazard community engagement, especially around BRT. So the more we can get, the better. My question, I guess, is to the room. So Met Council will do their community outreach and community engagement, and those opportunities get pushed to members of the TAB, to other, not interested parties isn't the right word, stakeholders. For the people on the call, how are you all thinking about outreach and community engagement around this process?
Well, maybe we could start, that's a good question, but maybe we could start by asking the staff, if you look at slide 11, we got that one back up again, I think that's kind of the heart of the whole thing, is that the delay allows us to align what we would say would be our outreach and public engagement goals. Just from this conversation we've had today, I think we want to make sure that we cast the net as far as we can in terms of engaging people with respect to these potential 11 lines that could end up, one of them could end up being the F line. What are staff thinking about the strategy for outreach and public engagement given this extra time? And then how does that help narrow the choices that the council would eventually have to make with respect to both the final candidates and then also the F line winner? So Ms. Venowitz, or is Sarah still on? Or Charles, what are you thinking about? You're the person who's
I can certainly speak to it briefly, and would definitely welcome others to join in as they wish. I mean, really, it's the extra time to do the engagement that we would have liked to do all along, and were interrupted by the various events of 2020. So initially, it's feedback on the criteria and the top corridors. That would then, shape the ones that fully advance to concept development. In that second phase, kind of toward December, it would be, really feedback on the concepts we've developed and on the evaluation criteria that we've identified from the input that we have in the first phase. And then, as we get narrowed from this, from this big map down to that top tier, it really becomes around where are the opportunities, what is the readiness, what is the, which of these, especially of these top three, that's where we can get into corridor specific discussions, and the additional time as we're requesting can help us connect with neighborhoods, with community members, with the TAB members in their organizations around, which of these we advance. And that's the kind of robustness with which we can, I think, accomplish our shared objectives.
I think, Member Foster, if I'm listening to you correctly, I think one way we could do this would be, they're going to come back and staff will be back in September and ask for action on this in terms of a deferral of selection of the F line from December 2020 to April 2021. What I hear you saying is, why don't you come back with what your outreach and public engagement strategies are, and so that we can have input into that at the same time we're trying to make a decision on whether to defer or not.
Yeah.
That Member Foster, go ahead. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I'm just thinking out loud.
That is, so Mr. Chair, thank you. And thank you, Charles, for the follow-up. That is part of the answer. And I think that as we're all talking about increasing community outreach and engagement, I don't know if it is the role of this body to have people come to the next meeting with commitments about what they are going to do with their constituents. Like, what will be your outreach tactics around this? That's what I'm interested in hearing from the other TAB members on the call. So I'm a member of the Twin Cities Transit Rider Union, and one of the things that we would love to do around this, and that we canvass bus and train riders, was getting out there and talking, and how do we report that back to Charles and his team, and what are the different commissioners on the call planning to do, and maybe by the next meeting, I don't know if there needs to be a working group or something like that to gather all of those together. I just think if we want this process to be as meaningful as the delay is really demonstrating,
sure,
we should think of ways to increase that outreach.
I think what would be helpful to elected officials would be, if we knew what was intended, we could figure out how to augment that public engagement or supplement it, expand it, however you want to describe it. But I think that for elected officials, they'd like to know what the core strategy is first. But maybe we could know that within a couple of weeks, so that by the time we come back in 4 weeks, they've had a 2-week period of time where they could meet with their staff people to discuss, here's what's being proposed by Metro Transit and Metropolitan Council staff, then come in with these supplemental ideas at the same time.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Member Barber, was that Member Barber?
Yeah, there was somebody else too, so I want to make sure we don't miss that.
Commissioner Holberg, I think, was first.
Okay.
Right, is right as well.
Well, I'll just be really brief. I think it's a good idea to delay, but I also am curious, or would want some information at the September meeting on how we will factor or plan for what at least some, if not many, view as a wholesale evolution in commuter behavior and businesses in Minneapolis. And I mean, there is not a single person that used to work downtown Minneapolis 5 days a week that I've spoke to that believes they'll ever do that again. The commercial realtors out here are inundated with businesses that are looking to, at the end of their leases, to relocate from the downtown. I think certainly the COVID issue has some type of backstop or timeline. When you get a vaccination, you're probably going to see certain riders that weren't going to ride come back. But I think there's going to be a wholesale evolution of how people work, how they commute, if they commute. And so I'm just curious if there's a element of engaging the business community to try and at least have some handle on that evolution, how deep, how wide it's going to be.
Now, Yeah, and then it tells us that deferring until April is probably a good idea to pull some of that data, at least preliminarily too. Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple comments for both of those sort of veins of thought. So for the general outreach, I know like we've been had pretty robust outreach for our two currently built ABRTs. We've learned a lot from each of them. We learned a lot from the A line, which we did, significantly more outreach, both with the local communities and the business communities as the C line was being developed and built. And that's what they're really wanting to see, and where you get a chance to actually connect with people in the communities, because that's where you get the best feedback. Of course, that's challenging right now, but I can tell you as a council, we've been talking about it internally as well, because, how do we engage with neighborhood groups and things like that, where it's not always just with the cities themselves, but the people living in the areas that we're working on. And so I know Charles and his team is very tied into all of those discussions, so he knows how our council feels about it. So I think a lot of the conversation we're having today are very similar to the conversations we're having at council. So I will definitely make sure all of that information gets passed along. To the commissioner's comments about the COVID response. So we had the presentation here, I believe, in June about the initial reach back out to the TBI participants, so the transit or transportation behavior inventory. We will be reaching out to those people again a couple more times to continue to see how travel behavior changes. We are very distinctly seeing a change, especially related to commuter travel. It was similar to the numbers I told you, talked about in my report, but also in people's responses to that of whether they think that they will continue to remote work or if they think that they will actually go back into an office. And there are some very distinct trends that we're also watching. I do think it's a good idea to do some additional reach out to the business community, because these are the employees that we're reaching out, but it would be good to know a little bit more about what some of the business community is thinking. So I will take that back to Nick and his group to kind of figure out what we can do to inform this stuff going forward.
Very good. Thanks, Member Barber. Member Reich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just sort of responding to Member Forrester's comments, I will definitely prompt our staff to put into one or two pager a summary of our outreach activities. Some of them actually will overlap with our current ones because we're creating our transit action plan as we speak. So some of that material specifically speaks to the BRT mode, but we'll also do additional work that's specific to that mode that would be complement to the activities of this body. So I will commit to prompting staff to create a summary that hopefully will be useful in the manner that our member had suggested.
Yeah, good. Thank you. It was Commissioner McGuire and then Mayor Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your indulgence in asking another question here. So it occurs to me as we're getting all this information and having this public engagement, if we would like to see other more information presented as these projects get analyzed, there's maybe a map that we could overlay, which is usage on a street with access to with access to cars. It's the population that would use transit but don't have cars. So I do believe that there's data out there like that. So if we want data like that to be overlaid, how do we get that into the process, or do we just ask for greatest population with the least amount of cars?
Great question, Ms. Chair and Commissioner. That is part of what we include in the measure around corridor propensity to use transit, and we'll have additional details as we're actually producing the technical reports that will accompany some of our outreach upcoming, and we'll certainly be able to connect with you and through your staff on any information that is of interest.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Commissioner. Mayor Heyman Roland.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this conversation. It's been a robust conversation, and I believe that when we have that public engagement, it really ultimately creates a better project. and it makes a difference. So, Member Foster, I will also bring this to our Chamber of Commerce, because our Chamber of Commerce will have a great way of connecting and with our business community. And I know I have Kathy Bodmer, who's with me right now, our staff, and collectively we will write something up and we'll get this out to all of our council members and put it on one of our items on the council meeting. So thank you for that question.
All right. Other tab members have comment?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Who? Oh, Member Sanger.
Couple of questions. First of all, I also do agree with the revised timeline and analytical process here. I have two questions. The first is, so as I looked at the criteria that were used to at least narrow down the potential routes, it looked like it was quite dependent on the amount of transit ridership now or recently. And my question is, how do you figure out or assess how many new riders you would get who currently may drive their cars to factor them into the potential ridership estimates as well? That's my first question. My second question goes to the fact that I know that in Minneapolis and St. Louis Park and a number of other places, that zoning laws are being changed to at least sometimes require really a much smaller amount of parking spaces for new apartment buildings, which means that right there you have a population that may be more than receptive to transit ridership. How do we factor in these new projects and their potential riderships into the calculation for which line gets selected?
Great question. In the criteria, we do consider not just the people who are using transit today, but the people that might. And so the propensity to use transit factor, as well as the planned land use factor, inform who might use transit if we make a transit improvement. That accounts for a number of different factors. It includes automobile availability, it includes density, it includes street network design. In addition to that, planned land use would be where we could capture things like how parking minimums might change over time, or where significant intensification in development would occur across our network. So when we put those together, those are equal in weight at 30% to existing average daily use in these corridors in terms of ridership. So I think we have a good balance of both present existing as well as potential and future as we advance and evaluate these lines.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just to add on to Charles' comments, I think one of the benefits that future planning has is now we do have the A line and the C line, and we've been able to see that having service like ABRT does increase ridership in those corridors. So I think we have better quantifiable data to see how ridership changes when you put in an ABRT. Even if you're on, on frequent routes, it still increases service.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to, before that question came in, I was going to thank staff for putting in forward-looking measures like planned use to look at, well, we're making large investments that take time to develop and really incorporating where cities want to go versus where they are, where they have been in the last 10 years. I think that's a great aspect to add in here. I wish we could do that more in other places where we're measuring. So I just wanted to thank staff for looking at that, and also thank them for keeping some green lines north of 694.
Good. Thank you. Other comments? This is not an action item, as we know, but it will be coming to us next month. All right. Anyone else on this issue? Charles, if we could have that, or maybe it's Elaine, see this far enough in advance of the next meeting where engagement strategies are discussed within the context of the action requested, that would give folks time then to think through how they might strengthen that engagement process. So keep that in mind as you're looking at dissemination of information to the tab members.
Mr. Chair?
Member Dugan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Commissioner Holberg, for bringing up the suburban communities. I am the TAB citizen representative for Dakota County, but and so I'm volunteering myself to go anywhere in Dakota County or any place around the metro, including door to door, to get citizen input. I don't care, day or night. You know, I said knock on doors, stand on street corners. You'll just have to bail me out, though, if you know I'm creating a nuisance. But as Mayor Mary said, whether it's the business community or in Commissioner McGuire's, you know, town hall meetings, just let me know what I can do to help, Charles. Thank you, Madam Commissioner.
Thank you, Member Dugan. Other thoughts on this issue? We're a little bit over, folks. So any other items of tab members, other business for the membership? Great to have such a high level of participation today. Really good discussion. So good to see all of you. And I think that will do it.
Chair, this is Elaine.
Yes, Elaine.
Did you want me to report on the scoring process update?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Elaine. Yeah, we got carried up. There was one more informational item. Elaine has a short report on the scoring process update. So, yeah, thanks, Elaine, for that reminder.
Yeah, the information is attached. So I'll just give a quick overview. Just to give you a background, on May 15th, we had the deadline for the applications coming in, and we provided TAB a draft summary of those applications and the funding requests. And I've attached that again to the information item, and it has been updated from what you saw in May. We had some funding amounts adjusted after we went through the applications to make sure it was 20% match, and then also they weren't asking for more than the maximum. And our scoring committees, we had 11 categories for the applications, and we set up 8 scoring committees. So some scoring committees went through a couple applications that had fewer applications submitted. And they initially met at the end of June, and we talked with the scorers about the specific measures they would be scoring and the scoring guidance that was adopted. They spent a couple months going through these and then met again at the end of July and August. They submitted our scores, and then we met as full committees to review the scores and then answer any questions that any specific scores wanted some guidance from the full committee. And then last week, we were contacting some of the applicants to get some more detailed information on some of the, where there were some questions on the information in there. And we went back to the scores and sent emails out for the full committee to reassess those responses. So as of today, we're expecting to have the final draft of those scores out to the Funding and Programming Committee, who's meeting tomorrow. And then we will also send them out to the applicants, and they will have until August 31st to send in appeals for any of their scores. And that methodology is if they see one of their measures was misscored, they would appeal on that measure. If not, we don't like our full total score, they would need to appeal on a specific measure. We think something was missed in our response because when we look at the responses of the other applications in that category, our response had higher population, had higher usage, had more multimodal elements. So they would need to detail why they think there was an error on their measure scored. And then we would bring that information back to the specific scorer to review to see if they made an error and adjust if needed, and review by the full committee. And then those scores and appeals would be brought to Funding and Programming in September to vote on to adjust those scores and then finalize the scores. And then after that, we will start the procedures of doing the funding scenarios, and we'll bring those to TAB for a couple months, and then final decision in December. And we did have 72 scores in total, representing 24 entities. And with all the measures we had, that's quite a few. And between our two full scoring committee meetings, we did have some measures that went across several applications. So those scores met individually together to make sure they were scoring the same. So if, for example, the equity measure, the equity scores met together to make sure they scored them similarly across the applications. So we'll send out these scores later today, and funding and programming will then wait for next month for the appeals, if there are any. Any questions?
Question, Member Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not a question as much of a comment. I just really want to thank all of the people who participate in scoring. It's a lot of work, and on behalf of the council, just thank you to everybody who took the time and did all that hard work. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, quick question.
Barber. Yes.
Member Geisler, just a question. As far as for the scores, I've had some conversations with folks in my area who've had maybe feedback on scoring. Could you talk about how scorers have ability to provide feedback not only within the process with each other, but also back to TAB to if this measure was hard or difficult or unclear, and what that feedback loop is for the improvement for the next solicitation?
Yes, what we did get some comments during our second meeting, and we will be sending out a survey to our scorers. We do this every 2 years so that we do get that feedback. There had been some changes with the solicitation, and so anytime we have a change, then sometimes the scoring guidance wasn't that clear. The most questions that we received this time was on the risk assessment. We had added a concept layout plan, and that ended up having more questions raised because if they showed on their plan that there was right-of-way needed or easements, they didn't indicate whether they had them or not. So we had to go back to the applicants to find out. So we will. And that won't be necessarily a policy decision. We just need to put more detail on what we want on the concept map and indicate whether we have the easement or not, or the right of way. So a lot of the comments came on that, so that we had a lot more questions on what was part of the project or not. And we always take feedback. So we'll get the surveys out. After we finish the appeals process, we will send out a survey to our scorers. We have sent one out to the applicants already, so we wanted to get their feedback when it was fresh in their minds after they filled out the applications, instead of waiting till we were done with everybody. So after the scores, then we'll go through our surveying our committee members when we're done with the process in December. So we'll get a rolling feedback as we go.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I know I'd be very interested if anyone had any questions about, or the scores had any questions about what our intent was for any of the things we've changed. But I know they all work really well and do a lot of good questions, but anything that would rise back to the, hey, we changed, we waited, we did it, that's more rises to us would be great to even just see a summary of. So thank you for that.
And we will provide a summary of all the comments of the surveys before we start the next solicitation redo or update.
Okay, other questions, comments? Kevin Reich, if you're on the line still, check the chat box, please. And yeah, Elaine, you're starting to look like an air traffic controller there you got your new headset and the microphone, and you and Chris Geisler right next to each other. It looks like a Delta.
Yeah, now that I'm in my office, I got it all set up again. My office is next door to my son's room, and I figured he didn't need to sit and listen to the TAB meeting.
All right.
He can hear me speak, but not the rest of you.
Great to see all of you. And it was a very good meeting. So getting good comments on it in the chat room as well. And we will, I guess, see you in a month. Mayor, good to see y'all. Here we go. Away we go. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.